attack in the heart of the European Union. Many are dead and many more have been injured in a series of bomb attacks in Brussels. What we feared has happened. Belgium's Prime Minister speaks out against the attacks, but was it possible to prevent them? In this Newsmakers special program, we'll analyze the state of Europe's security situation. And we'll ask if Belgium is becoming Europe's front line in the war on terror. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. It was an attack that many feared, but no one had anticipated would be played out quite as it was. On Tuesday morning, the attackers struck at the heart of Europe, causing death and devastation and bringing Brussels, the home of the European Union, to a standstill. United in the fight against terror, Europe's leaders rallied together once again, just 4 months after the attacks that left Paris, Belgium's neighbour, reeling. Today's Newsmaker is the city of Brussels, as we ask if Europe is fighting a losing battle in its struggle to contain a growing terror threat.
A suspected suicide bombing striking Belgium's main airport. An attack targeting people at a terminal and a metro station near the main buildings of EU institutions.
There were 2 bombs. The first one I didn't hear, and the second one was on the departures.
Belgium's security services had already been on high alert. But days after the capture of Europe's most wanted man over the Paris attacks, terror has again struck at the heart of the European Union. It's an attack the Belgian authorities had feared could happen. 2 explosions have just gone off at Brussels airport on a busy Tuesday morning.
What it was? A job or was it a terrorist?
Amid the destruction, a passenger picks up a baby. Others huddle on the ground in shock, unsure what has happened. Moments later, security arrives and orders people to clear the area. Panicked passengers rush to leave.
There was a huge explosion and a lot of shaking and dust falling from the air ducts and people running, we all ran for cover.
The second bomb exploded and then we saw doors flying, glass ceiling coming down. And smoke and everything, and then we run away to an emergency exit.
In another part of the city, the screams of survivors after another attack. This metro station is next to Brussels' European Quarter, meters away from where Angela Merkel and other world leaders regularly meet. Passengers escaping on a dark day for Belgium. Outside rescue crews treat the survivors. Dozens were injured. Many died. The attack started at about 8 o'clock local time at Brussels airport with reports of shots fired. Then 2 explosions tore through the departures area not far from Brussels Airlines check-in desks. An hour later, a 3rd explosion goes off at the Malbec metro station, right by the European Commission and European Council. It was rush hour and designed to cause maximum casualties.
Onze eerste gedachte.
Our thoughts are, of course, with the victims and the families of the victims. Also the people who are still without any news about those closest to them who have been confronted with such a tragic moment. I ask everyone to remain calm as far as possible and to remain in solidarity in these difficult circumstances.
The explosions are the latest in a number of terror attacks to target Western Europe, and the investigation will inevitably focus on Daesh. Just last week, Belgian police mounted a security raid in Brussels and finally seized the main fugitive from last November's Paris attacks. Salah Abdeslam had been on the run for 4 months. But even after his capture, the Belgian authorities had warned of possible revenge attacks.
There are many more accomplices that need to be found to explain themselves.
The Belgian government has now raised its terror alert to the highest level, and Brussels is on lockdown. As the injured are treated, many Belgians will question how this seemingly highly coordinated attack was able to take place. What led to such hatred to commit the attacks? And why, despite all the security measures, have the Belgian authorities failed to stop them? Duncan Crawford, The Newsmakers.
Let's speak now to our reporter in Brussels, Jack Parrock. He's been following those events as they happened in the Belgian capital. Jack, give us a sense of how authorities there and ordinary people in Brussels are responding and dealing with the situation after the chaos of the morning.
Well, these attacks have shaken the city of Brussels, normally an incredibly civilized city. The Malbec train station serves many of the buildings that work in and around the European Union HQ here in Brussels. The Interior Minister of Belgium, Jan Jambon, has announced 3 days of mourning in Belgium, and there's been an outpouring of sympathy from international leaders. You can see behind me the flags of the Berlaymont, the European Commission HQ, are flying at half-mast, and people here are just really trying to work out exactly what's happened, check that their friends are safe. We've seen on social media, as we've seen many times when these recent terror attacks have taken place, people registering and marking themselves as safe. But clearly, with at least 20 people killed on that train that entered Malbec station and 11 more at Brussels airport, there will be families across the city of Brussels that will be torn apart by these terror attacks. It's an odd and eerie feeling on the streets at the moment, very calm, but obviously a heightened sense of fear as we learn more details about these attacks and we see the death toll rising. We know that many of the people that were in these locations when the attacks took place are gravely injured and still are fighting for their lives potentially. It's a worrying situation. I am directly affected. A friend of mine was on one of those trains, so this is something that people in Brussels are experiencing. They know people, obviously, that were on these trains, and it's a really scary situation at the moment. The Belgian authorities obviously say that their key priority is to prevent any further attacks in the coming hours and days.
Jack Parrock, thank you very much for that update. Now, the blasts in Brussels are the latest in a recent spike in attacks on European soil. But the continent has suffered several attacks over the past few years. 191 people were killed and more than 1,800 wounded in coordinated train bombings in Madrid in 2004. An al-Qaeda-inspired cell claimed responsibility. Then, in 2005, al-Qaeda-linked suicide bombers killed 52 people in central London. Far-right terrorists have also carried out attacks in Europe in recent years. In 2011, Anders Behring Breivik killed 77 people in Norway. And in the past 18 months, there's been a new wave of attacks in Western Europe, this time blamed on Daesh. 16 people were killed in shootings at the Charlie Hebdo satirical magazine and a Jewish supermarket in Paris in 2014. And in November last year, 130 people were killed in coordinated attacks on the French capital. Well, joining me now to look at Europe's growing security concern is Lee Doddidge, a security expert. He's in Cardiff in the UK. Shiraz Maher is a senior fellow at the International Centre for the Study of Radicalization at King's College in London. And in Paris is Yasser Louati from the Collective Against Islamophobia. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Let me start with you, Lee Doddidge. Could these attacks have been prevented?
Well, thank you for letting me join you today. And first of all, I'd like to say that no, they couldn't. We face such a diverse threat at the moment, and with so many potential locations that they would see as a crowded place and a potential target. From a physical perspective, there's very little that we can actually achieve at the moment, purely with the diverse range of tactics, weaponry, and obviously explosives from there. Probably at the moment, the most likely chance for us to be able to catch or identify this sort of activity actually is through the intelligence collection, which we know across Europe at the moment is still an issue that needs to be coordinated better.
And Lee, there is a suggestion that this was activated in response to the apprehending of Salah Abdeslam. Could that have been possible? Could they have done this quickly in such a coordinated way?
Yes, I believe so, and probably for them at the moment quite fairly easily, really. If you look at the network that he was a part of, the sophistication and the coordination and the attacks that they conducted in Paris, following that, thankfully, was the apprehension of the other cell later on. But obviously the support network that's been able to keep him in hiding all this time until last Friday. They're more than capable to mount these sort of attacks. The preparation for it was probably well underway anyway, as part of a wider operation. We've known for many months now the numerous people that we believe have travelled back through from Syria into Central Europe. The selection of the targets, however, could have been done quite quickly. It wouldn't have taken a long time to plan the locations. You could have done that from yesterday. It doesn't take much to consider, something like Brussels Airport is full. It averages 54,000 people every day, and also the metro is busy. So, the acquisition of the weapons and the explosives is what will take the planning part, which I firmly believe they already had that capability for some time now. And obviously, with the interruption of the cell last Friday, there's a high risk of obviously future compromise with ongoing operations. So it would have been relatively easy for them to carry out the attacks this morning.
Yasser Louati, is this the new normal for Europe now, where Europe's main cities come under attack by young men who claim to be acting in the name of Islam and maim and massacre innocent civilians? Is this the new normal?
I mean, first, the reaction is shock and horror, and I sincerely send my condolences to Belgium. This is our closest city, and everybody goes there. And at the same time, now Belgium is now joining the ranks of all these countries that have been attacked by terrorism. Turkey several times, Tunisia, Mali, Ivory Coast, and the list is quite long. But yes, now we are definitely facing a continental problem of homegrown terrorists. But this begs the question, what would make someone hate his country or her country so much that he's willing to attack it in the name of a foreign organization? And that needs to be addressed. Because right now, so far, we are just running after or chasing consequences.
Okay, let's try to answer that. Europe is struggling to stop the flow of people traveling from the continent to conflict zones in the Middle East, despite efforts to stem the flow. According to intelligence consultancy, the Soufan Group, the number of foreign fighters in Syria and Iraq has more than doubled in the last year, with around 5,000 people traveling from Europe to Syria. There's concern about what is driving them there in the first place and the risk these fighters pose when they return home. Yvette McCullough looks at the numbers and Europe's strategy to combat the problem.
Around 5,000 people have travelled from across Europe to join the fight in Syria. A report by an intelligence consultancy called Soufan Group found that of those fighters, almost three-quarters have come from just 4 countries. 1,700 fighters are from France, 760 from Germany, and the same figure from the UK, while 470 are from Belgium. Belgium has the highest number of fighters per capita. The report estimates that 20 to 30% of fighters have returned in Western countries. Europol estimates that percentage is even higher. In response to the growing threat, the European Union has come up with a strategy for combating radicalisation and recruitment to terrorism. The strategy is designed to disrupt the activities of the networks and individuals who draw people into terrorism, ensure that voices of mainstream opinion prevail over those of extremism, and promote yet more vigorously security, justice, democracy, and opportunity for all. The European Union says it will achieve this through community policing and more effective monitoring of the internet. It also plans to engage Muslim communities and stop the creation of environments that lead people to become more easily radicalised. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Okay, well, Yasser, you said we need to be asking this question. Let's ask the question. What do you think drives these young men? There are a lot of people who live in poverty, who are treated badly by the governments that they live in. Arguably, life is tough for a lot of people, but only a select few tend to do very terrible things, particularly in the name of Islam. Who do you blame and what do you think is driving them?
I mean, it's very difficult to blame anyone right now. We still are collecting information, and information is indeed quite scarce. But as you mentioned it, there are tough problems, dealing with the integration of these communities in Europe. And so far, every single time a terrorist attack is carried out on our continent, the fingers are being pointed at Muslim communities who at the same time are not really engaged in the official strategies adopted by various governments. And of course, I can speak for France, while dealing with radicalization, only selects the organizations who will say what the government wants them to say. And that's a major problem.
Shiraz Maher, does it disturb you that, for all intents and purposes, Salah Abdeslam was seemingly protected for 4 months in Molenbeek? It probably took a lot of people who knew he was there to ensure that the security forces couldn't get to him. Does that bother you, Shiraz?
Well, I don't think it takes that many people. It only needs a handful of people who are dedicated or committed to him and to the types of things he was trying to achieve to provide him with sanctuary. I don't think he was moving around, for example, particularly during that time. So provided there's someone there to provide a safe house, and then they're able to provide him with food and sustenance and so on, you only need a few people. But it is highly alarming that someone who was so wanted by French authorities, by Belgian authorities, he was described as the most wanted man in Europe after the attacks, was able to sit like this in the Belgian capital for 4 months. That is quite a significant period of time. And so I think it does demonstrate the need as well to have better networks of insight in terms of how we're understanding the pattern of radicalization, the networks of radicalizers, and the sort of subcultures and milieus that these individuals belong to.
Lee, how do you think governments can do better in solving this riddle of radicalization?
Well, I think there's a number of areas that they need to concentrate on. I mean, I can only comment really on the UK's perspective, where we look at the prevent and pursue aspects to look at the radicalisation. We need to understand, the sort of messages that are being put out, and obviously the intended audiences from there, and why they actually resonate with those audiences. It is very difficult if you look at the classic profile of a young male wishing to go in, or even thinking about going and joining Daesh. Just look at some of the media productions that they put out. This isn't media that's produced just on a camcorder at home. These are full media productions, very well put together. And you can also almost understand, looking at the quality there, almost like the draw for some individuals there. So it is very hard for us to combat this, but it's even harder if we do this as individual countries. What we need to be focusing on is the close collaboration, especially across the EU and even wider again from there. There's always been a difficulty for governments to share intelligence. And primarily that's because they don't want to disclose the methods in which they've obtained that. What we need to be able to do is almost like draw a line in the sand. I would say, look, we need to share the intelligence.
Shiraz, I want to move this on for a second and talk a little bit about Syria, because there's this idea that if you solve Syria, if you have a political solution in Syria, everything else will fall into place. But these homegrown attacks, particularly in Europe, started a long time before Syria even flared up. So is that wrong, Shiraz? Solving Syria solves the puzzle?
Well, I think it's a small part of it. Certainly, if you look at the terrorist threat facing Europe in the aftermath of 9/11, then we seem to be sucking a lot of heat out of that around the time Syria became an issue. The problem right now, of course, is that the type of political solution or settlement that people are looking to achieve in Syria is essentially one of a settlement between the rebels, which is broadly the Syrian people, and the regime. The most dangerous outfit operating currently in that territory, of course, along the eastern corridor, is the so-called Islamic State, and to a lesser extent, ironically, but to a lesser extent now, Al-Qaeda, which is operating in parts of northwestern Syria. And these are two groups that will not be bound by, that will adhere to, or will honor any type of political settlement. So the unfortunate reality is, even if you were to, I suppose, in an ideal circumstance, if we could wave a magic wand and end hostilities between the regime and its own people through much of the eastern side of the country, particularly running up to sort of Aleppo and so on, you still could not tame Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, which is operating as Jabhat al-Nusra in that country. So in that sense, the threat from those two aspects would still be very, very high, and it's something that we need to look at in terms of a long-term strategy, because unfortunately all the indications are that this is a problem that will continue to run. It's a region that's going to be in turmoil for a very long time to come in the future, and as a result of that, I think Europe needs a collective strategy. I completely echo what my colleague was saying previously in terms of Europe needs to get much better in terms of having a collective sense of security.
Patriotic and fully integrated French Muslim or European Muslim in any one of those countries and disagree with your country's policies, whether it's in Syria or Iraq or Mali or elsewhere. Is it possible to be both?
It is very difficult to be fully, for example, French, Muslim, and living peacefully in society. You are constantly being put in the box of, quote, the other. And if you are holding, for example, a Muslim name, you have less chances of accessing to education, jobs, decent housing, etc. So we already have a root cause that is, you know, to put it plainly, social. And I heard both of your guests, and they were right on the security issues we need to tackle, but we cannot forget the social problems we also have to address. I will quote to you, for example, you know, every single agency in France, our domestic intelligence, external intelligence, the Secretary General for Defense and National Security, they all say that we have to address the social problems that are at the beginning of the radicalization process. When you have people who start hating their society, and I will quote to you again anti-terror judge Mark Trevidich, they all say to you, once you begin feeling not being part of this society, provided you have some vulnerabilities, you may be tempted by these radical ideas, and you don't need 1,000 of them. A handful is enough, provided that, you know, the ideological battle is being won by these groups, which is the case, provided that they are highly professional when they communicate, which is the case, and at the same time, we don't have clear role model for this youth. We need to put forward models of success in our societies, people who are fully Muslim, French, Belgian, British, etc., and to send a broader message to the wider minorities, telling them, you don't have to go there, it is quite possible. But in the case of France, for example, you are constantly being told to show your loyalty to this country, and it is difficult to be part of a group that keeps telling you, you are not part of us. Just look at how the French government is reacting after the November attacks.
Okay. Final thoughts now from Shiraz and Lee. I'm going to start with you, Shiraz. Very briefly, please, sir, because we are running out of time. Do you worry for the future of Europe, Shiraz?
I think Europe is facing a series, and will continue to face a series, of very significant security challenges going into the future, and that those security challenges play into a much broader sense of social concern across Europe. So we've seen, of course, a large sense of trepidation in a number of European countries about the migrant crisis, for example, and broader social issues. That is the unfortunate reality of the way that terrorism works within our societies. It is capable of shifting the dial quite dramatically on a number of issues, and doing so in a relatively short period of time. And so as a result of that, I think I try to remain upbeat. I think we should always have faith that we can overcome this. We shouldn't allow ourselves to fall into reactionary responses to this kind of activity, but it would also be incorrect to say that Europe doesn't face huge challenges. It does, and it needs to find ways to cope with them going forward.
Okay, well said. Lee, final thoughts from you, please, in less than 30 seconds, please, sir. Is terrorism tearing Europe apart at the seams? Is it winning?
No, I don't think it is. If anything, and we've heard some good responses from leaders, and as long as it's more than just a response, this is the opportunity then for the European leaders and European countries and agencies to draw together now and really put up a united front. We can defeat the threat from terrorism. There are things we can do in a practical sense, and we can move forward to defeat the threat.
Lee Doddidge, Shiraz Maher and Yasser Louati, thank you very much for joining us. Today's newsmaker has been Belgium's capital, Brussels. It's the second European capital in a little over 4 months to fall victim to a multifaceted attack, leaving dozens dead and many more injured. Across Europe, flags are being flown at half-mast as the continent grapples with the ever-growing reality that it is yet another problem to add to its list of challenges. As Europe questions why these attacks can and have taken place, some are already asking if the European Union needs to change its strategy and look beyond its borders. Turkey and other countries have in recent weeks also been victim to similar attacks. So could a more coordinated strategy be the answer to keeping everyone safe? You've been watching this special edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.